Welcome to NewFinance. Adrian, thank you for coming. You're the inaugural CEO of the NPP. You're here to talk about the new payments platform. Can I commend you on the title of your company? It's very descriptive. So New Payments Platform Australia is responsible for the new payments platform. You were General Manager of Product and Service at Cuscal. And actually Cuscal was a founding participant of the Real-Time Payments Committee, which is going back in time a little bit, yeah?
Correct.
And actually you personally were involved in some of the design work that went on in those days, as I understand it. So you know this area well. You've got a little bit of a presentation for us tonight, and
sure,
maybe a video or so. Let me hand over to Adrian to take us through that.
Thanks, Andrew. It's good to be here. And I'm kind of keen to talk informally about the NPP and answer some questions about where it's come from and where I think and some other people think it might be going. But obviously it's very early days in the journey, although we have been kind of working on it for about 4 years now. There's obviously still a lot of the book that's yet to be written, so it's good to be here with a bunch of people who we hope will use the NPP in the future. Where did this come from? I've been talking to a couple of people in the room who know some of the earlier chapters in this story, but so let's just start in 2012 when the Reserve Bank wrote a discussion paper about some observations that it made about the Australian payment system, and it posed about 5 questions, which were: why is the banking system only open Monday to Friday, kind of 9 to 5? Why is all the interesting stuff that's happening in payments coming from organisations outside payments? Why is it that you can only send about 26 or 28 characters along with every payment? Why is it that I can send an email around the world and it can appear in a matter of seconds, but if I sent you $50, it'll come into your account tomorrow morning? And these things called BSBs and account numbers, which were kind of dreamt up in the days when you had a bank branch that you went to open your account. And BSB stands for Bank State Branch. So the Westpac Bank in New South Wales at Paddington was given a specific number. These things called BSBs and account numbers, why do I need to know that about you in order to send you money? And it invited the industry to reflect on some of those shortcomings and to think about how it might address those. And the industry came together through the Real-Time Payments Committee and designed a plan which aimed to kind of answer some of those questions, but also extend that thinking and take it into the kind of next generation and set up a piece of infrastructure for the future, which is where the NPP has come from. And it's obviously had some twists and turns along the way, but it's fair to say that that provocation and the initial questions that the RBA asked were an important part of the genesis of this work. We've been doing some little bit of kind of market research among some of our participants as part of a piece of work we're doing on something that's irrelevant for these purposes. But I really like this quote that one of the participants from the NPP ecosystem came up with. People live in real time. It's time that we live in their world too. And I think it's a really kind of useful kind of primer for what the NPP is about. I don't need to tell you particularly, but the world is changing rapidly. The growth of digital, the appification of everything, the immediacy that's required and sought, the disruption of existing business models that's occurring through the appification of everything is kind of ravishing and putting disruptive forces throughout the economy. First publishing and broadcasting, and next kind of transport and Uber, and on my way down here I was run over by half a dozen Deliveroo drivers, which suggests that the next field is in kind of the distribution of kind of food and menus from restaurants. So as the environment and society and expectations change in Australia and around the world, it's time for Australia's payment system to make that evolution to support that infrastructure and the economy that we're moving towards. And that's what the NPP is intending to do. A little bit about the structure of the NPP, and I know that some of you are more familiar with it than others, and I apologise for those of you that are really looking for the deep technical knowledge. You're not going to get that tonight, and you're unlikely to get it from me. But let's kind of take a high-level view about what's going on with the infrastructure. So in the centre is NPP Australia, which I work for. I am employee number 1. And I am currently still the only employee of NPP Australia. And it was established by 12 participants, recently 13, to run the NPP. Around it you can see a bunch of different pieces of infrastructure. First and foremost, I guess starting at the top, the financial institutions that are participants in the NPP. There are currently 13 of them, and over time they have worked to design some architecture and to build out a particular design model, and in a process, a relatively lengthy process, selected Swift, which is well known for payments market infrastructure around the world, to build and to operate that infrastructure. So it's a 13-year contract. 3 years to do the build work and 10 years to operate. But the IP is owned by NPP Australia, and the system is run and owned by NPP Australia, with Swift being an operator of that. There are 3 main components to the infrastructure. There's a network and connectivity layer. There's a switch that moves messages around in real time, and there's an addressing service, which we'll come back to later. And the addressing service is part of the core infrastructure and will be available from day 1. The RBA on the left-hand side is building a fast settlement service. We'll come back to this later, but the RBA is probably, and the Australian system is probably at the bleeding edge of real-time payment systems around the world. In that every single transaction, whether it's a $1 million house purchase or a $2.50 cup of coffee, every single transaction will be individually settled in real time, line by line, by the RBA, which will move money between the receiving bank and the sending bank's ESA account. And that is probably at the leading edge of real-time infrastructure around the world. On the right-hand side are overlay services. And the key differentiator between what we're building in Australia and the other systems around the world is this concept of an overlay service. And I like to talk about this as being a set of railway tracks and a set of trains that are going to sit on top of those railway tracks. And what we're building at the moment is we're building the railway tracks. We're building those to last for the next 50 years, to be strong enough for the future, to connect all of the places that we want to go, and to carry a range of different trains or rolling stock. Passenger trains, freight trains, fast trains, slow trains, trains that are run by the government, trains that are run by the private sector. There's going to be a whole bunch of traffic on these set of rails, and that traffic is called overlay services, and they will bring the infrastructure to life and offer different customer propositions to a business, to a person, to government, and that's where you guys come in helping to conceptualise what some of those overlay services might be that use this infrastructure that we're building for the future. What we're also building for day 1 is we're building the first overlay service, because there's nothing worse than building a brand new spanking railway system if there's nothing to go on it. So when we conceptualised the real-time payments committee work, we thought we need to bring this thing to life, and we need to show people what it can do and kind of prime the ecosystem so that people can conceptualise how it's going to work in practice, and also to build volume to help defray the capital investments that we were making into it. So the first overlay service will be brought to the market by BPay, which is obviously an organisation that's experienced in this area, and it will be the first but one of many overlay services that will come to market in the future. A little bit more about the basic infrastructure. It will operate 24/7, 365. There are no allowable maintenance windows. Conceivably, it will never be taken down for maintenance, and it's been designed in such a way that it will meet those expectations. It's being built using the ISO 222 standard, which I know a number of you are familiar with, which is the international standard that's used for messaging between financial institutions and other organisations that are moving money and data around. It's rich, it's extensible, and it's open, and it's not a standard that's controlled by any individual. The system moves money from ADI to ADI, from authorised deposit-taking institution to authorised deposit-taking institution, and is designed broadly to move not only the message and the confirmation messages, but also the funds door to door in less than 9 seconds. In many cases, it will be faster than 9 seconds, but that is the upper envelope. There is an addressing service that we'll come back to in a second, and it will be used as an alternate label for accounts. So rather than having to know Victoria's BSB and account number, I can look up her account number by using her mobile number. It will come back and say, do you mean Victoria Richardson? I can say yes, and the money will then move. There are a range of different aliases that can be used. Initially, it's being built to support mobile phone numbers, email addresses, ABNs and ACNs, and it will also be extensible so that it can be used for future alias types as they unfold. It is a new platform. It is not a renovation, it's not a replacement. We're not going to close anything down. We're building a brand new set of railway tracks that will connect all of the participant banks and a range of other organisations as well. It's not renovating existing infrastructure, it's a greenfield development. And lastly, we talked about the real-time value delivery through the RBA, so line-by-line settlement. Most of you will know that that's not how the banking system works today. Banks will, I will move money between accounts, so I might send Gavin some money, and our banks that we bank with will move that money at about 3 o'clock tomorrow morning. So there is a considerable degree of settlement risk and counterparty risk that is baked into the existing batch payment system. And that obviously came to the fore in the GFC when a whole bunch of banks collapsed and the money was in the wrong places. As money moves faster, it's important that settlement also moves faster to minimise the counterparty or settlement risk. So what we're building is we're building for the future. We're building line-by-line settlement, particularly given that the basic infrastructure will have no inherent value limits. It can be used at an infrastructure level for payments of unlimited amounts. A value limit might be set by banks and it might be set by overlay service providers, but the infrastructure is being built to handle very large amounts of money as well as very small amounts of money. And obviously that increases the settlement and counterparty risk. Overlay services, some facts about the overlay services. They will use the basic infrastructure, but they will be run commercially. My job is to run the infrastructure and to create a system and an organisation that will assist overlay services to come to life and to tend them and help them grow and give them a bit of information about how the infrastructure is going to work, and then stand back and let the market decide which overlay services are successful and which ones aren't. There will be a range of different overlay services and they may be potentially competitive. They may be 2 different overlay services run by 2 different groups of institutions doing the same thing, and you'll see the kind of app store effect. You'll see overlay services rise and fall and compete and buy each other out. That's the way it was designed. Overlay services can range from the very simple to the very complex, and there are at least 3 different sorts of overlay services. One might be a very basic rule book, a set of SLAs and a brand. Another might be an overlay service that uses a particular messaging field which is specific to that overlay service. And a third might include complex orchestration and message flows to go away and make calls to third parties, wait for a response, make another call, come back. The infrastructure has been designed to cater for a range of overlay services from the simple to the complex. There will be the opportunity to add extra tailored data fields within XML messages or to use the existing data sets that are part of the ISO standard. And payment providers can select from multiple overlay services or build their own. The first overlay service is being brought to market by BPay, and it will do, in time, 3 different things. It will provide the ability to move money in near real time, so less than 10 seconds, between people, person to person. There will also be the ability to include documentation with a payment. So if you're receiving a government benefit or a payment from a third party, say Medicare, rather than getting an unintelligible kind of field that means nothing to you, you can click on it and you'll get a PDF that you can store or print or save. And lastly, in my view, is that I think this is one of the more interesting things that we're seeing, is the ability to request a payment. So I can send you a request for money, it'll pop up in your mobile banking application, you can ignore it, delete it, or hit OK, and the money will come back in the other direction. So a request for payment. And you could send that to 15 people if you bought movie tickets or dinner. That's the kind of use case that's used a lot. Splitting dinner, giving me money back for the concert tickets that you owe me, send a payment request to 10 people and wait for the money to arrive. So the 3 overlay services, the initial overlay services, are part of the BPay service that'll be coming to market in the second half of 2017. But as I alluded to, there'll be a range of different overlay services that will come to the market in the near future. We have no idea what they're going to be. I know that there are a bunch of people sitting around thinking about this, and those discussions and conversations will evolve over time. Here are some ideas that people have thought about possible uses for this infrastructure. Starting from the top left, account-to-account payments, a mobile convenience payment, a point of sale, paying the plumber, paying the babysitter, emergency payments, receiving large, amounts of money from governments in the event of cyclones or floods or bushfires. Imagine being able to send $1,000 in real time to everybody that lives in a certain postcode. Or direct-to-account ticketing or tolls. So in the future, if the addressing service is extended to include, my favourite example, registration plates. I go through a speeding camera, I go over the Harbour Bridge, I go into Westfield and park, and my licence plate is snapped on the way out, and money comes out of my account, straight into the New South Wales Treasury to pay for all those fantastic speeding fines. Obviously data-rich messages, electronic invoicing, remittances, trade finance, data-rich payments. In the top right-hand corner, property transfer, selling houses, selling cars. You've got large amounts of data that moves in real time along with money. The use case that people talk about a lot is buying a second-hand car. If you think about the steps involved in that, there are multiple steps that all have to be done in the right order. If any one of those fails, then you go back to the beginning. Rev check, encumbrance check, registration, transfer, CTP insurance, new finance lien, money moves in real time. Get those in the right order. Currently, you run around over town, pink slip, yellow slip, green slip. Imagine automating that process. And participants might work together to build some services such as fraud monitoring, the ability to understand fraud patterns between institutions, or to batch and debatch payments and send them through the real-time infrastructure. So lots of ideas. I'm sure that you may have some of your own ideas. I want to finish by talking about 3 topical issues. Portability and the NPP addressing service. So in future, alias identifiers could be used to identify the destination of funds, where funds are being sent, or a place to which a request for payment is sent. And that could be used for payments to and from individuals, business and government. These will be unique personal credentials, such as the ones that I've listed there, and others in the future. Increasingly, rather than using BSB and account number, I will use that alias as a place for you to send me money or for you to request that I send you money. And the NPP addressing service incorporates from day one functionality which will enable aliases to be ported from one account to another account. So to delink and to relink an alias from X account to Y account at a different bank. So in that sense, it will make it easier for consumers to change their financial arrangements without having to change a whole bunch of underlying payment instruments. Yeah? The second question I get a lot is, when you say that the NPP is open access infrastructure, what do you mean by that? And I guess the principle around open access infrastructure is that the rules are clear, the entry points are clear, what you need to do to play is clear in rules that are published and visible and available to everybody. There are obviously hurdles that are implicit in a real-time payments infrastructure. And the principal restriction is that if you are settling transactions into the infrastructure, then you need to be prudentially regulated. You don't need to be a bank, but you need to be prudentially regulated. Why is that? Because I could send $1 million to Gavin, and Gavin could send $1 million to Victoria, and Victoria could send $1 million to Layla, and Layla can take it out of the ATM, maybe not the whole $1 million, but certainly a good chunk of it, in about a minute and a half. And in that environment, you need to make sure that the organisation that is settling or sponsoring transactions into the infrastructure is good for the cash. That's the principal restriction. Must be prudentially regulated and hold an ESA with the RBA. Outside of that, pretty much everything is kind of up for grabs. There are 13 participants today, and there's more that can join. The criteria are set out in the Constitution and the shareholders' agreement for the company. There are a range of different access models. There are agency access models. So my former employer is sponsoring 40 organisations into the NPP, and there are others like Indu and ASL and Westpac and ANZ that all do the same thing. There are bureau arrangements, so there are a number of large ADIs that are, rather than building their own infrastructure, these are big regional banks connecting via another bank, or via a customer relationship. And I predict, I don't know, but I predict that a range of organisations will be establishing sandboxes and API frameworks for organisations to work with and to understand how the message flows will work. The framework also allows for corporates who might be big payers to connect directly to the infrastructure, but to be sponsored into the infrastructure by another bank to do the settling of their transactions for them. Importantly, however, overlay services can be also developed by any organisation that meets certain criteria, minimum criteria, solvency, good favour, a whole range of criteria that you'd expect. They don't need to be regulated ADIs, they don't need to be prudentially regulated, they need to satisfy a range of criteria, they need to register with the NPP, and then they can hawk their offering to participants and to the market at large. And finally, fintechs and overlay services. So I was mentioning to a couple of you that I've just come back from Cybos, and apart from distributed ledger technology, which is still the topic du jour, I think the key topic was about the collaboration between fintechs and banks. Cybos, for those of you that don't know, is an international conference that's run by SWIFT, which is owned by banks. And it's got lots of European, American and banks from all around the world, about 16,000 delegates. It's absolutely clear to me that while there is a diversity of views, as you would expect between individual banks, that the banking sector generally accepts that it doesn't have the capital, the bandwidth, the desire or the ability to meet all of the needs of its customers, and that key to helping them succeed in this new economy is by partnering and collaborating with fintechs and other organisations to build out services that they don't want to build themselves. The NPP was created as a single, fast, data-rich platform that would enable that to occur. To enable banks to collaborate with each other and with fintechs to compete and to co-develop services that can sit on top of that infrastructure, with an open access model that's really clear about what you need to do to play on that playing field. My sense is that the layered architecture that underpins the NPP was designed to make that easier. Collaborate around the rails and compete around the services that sit on top of that. The marginal cost of bringing a product to life around a set of infrastructure that already connects all the banks in the country is relatively low, and certainly lower than starting from zero, and it allows organisations with great ideas to pitch those ideas to the market, to maximise the economies of scale, and to capture the network effects that are vitally important in payments. You know, the old story about, you know, what's the business case for a single fax machine or a single mobile phone? Not very much. There are lots of great ideas I've seen in payments that fail because they can't scale. And what the NPP offers is a platform for those organisations to bring those ideas to life. My job, as I said, and this is kind of our strategic blueprint that's been signed off by our board, is to build and operate that fast, data-rich payment system, to provide a platform for future growth and innovation. It's intended to be an economically self-sustaining piece of infrastructure, so not profit maximising, but to cover its own costs and to grow the network. And the key areas where I'll be focusing are obviously running the infrastructure in conjunction with our vendor Swift to encourage innovation on the platform, stakeholder engagement, participate in industry debates, and ensure that the thing is fit for purpose and runs well. What are the next steps for me? To move from 1 employee to 2 employees and 3 employees and beyond. To satisfy what I understand in the marketplace is a strong thirst for knowledge about the NPP, to publish resources and information, messaging standards, rules, procedures, and to make that available over time. To support the development and growth of future overlay services, and to progress towards go live in the second half of 2017. Thanks.
I'm not the most educated person in the room when it comes to NPP. In fact, I go so far as to say I'm probably the least, which hopefully means I'm asking interesting questions, or they're really dumb questions. So I had to spend a lot of time getting my head around this and trying to understand it. Firstly, I'd like to thank Cuscal for putting out some great documents that I found really helpful, particularly using the new payments platform. I think I'm ready. I noticed also in another document they said, along with monitoring competitors' media channels closely, financial institutions can gather insights by attending payments industry events and fintech meetups. I think that's a great idea. I was thinking through and trying to understand. So I get the rails and the train analogy.
Yep.
So there are 13 members. Who was the 13th? I missed that one. I had 12.
HSBC.
Okay. So they've all paid to be members and to help fund the building of the platform itself. Yeah.
Pay for the capital cost and the run costs.
Yep. Yep. So that means they can then all directly plug into the platform itself.
Yes.
If I'm a bank and I haven't paid up,
yes,
then I need to use one of them to access the platform.
Yes.
Yep. So as say a challenger bank, which we're seeing in the UK, but we're not really seeing in Australia, maybe Tyro accepted.
Yes.
Assuming we get to the point where we have challenger banks in Australia.
Yes.
What does it look like for a challenger bank then having to go and partner with a bank to access the NPP?
Sure. So this was a big issue in the UK, and the rise of a range of challenger banks in the UK, such as Atom Bank, Santander, and others, were really reluctant and felt frustrated, as I understand, because of the lack of access that they were being given by institutional banks. My experience in Australia is that the institutional banks have a long pedigree of providing payment services to other banks, and all of them largely. Certainly Westpac, NAB and ANZ have a long history in providing access to other banks. But the other thing I'd observe is that there are three organisations, Cuscal, Indu and ASL. They do nothing else than connect other banks and other organisations to the payments infrastructure. That's all they do.
You mentioned sponsoring 40 in.
Yes.
Is that right? Yeah.
Well, so between Cuscal, Indu and ASL, they are sponsoring in 70 banks and a range of other corporates. And I can assure you that there is a vigorous and competitive secondary market for connectivity to the NPP in Australia, and I know that, given where I've come from. So, I think there is a healthy market for connectivity to the NPP, my experience is if there's not a healthy market and the system's not working, then the RBA is always happy to, encourage the market to flex in response to problems that it sees, and it will be keeping a close eye on this, just as it has every other part of the payment system in the last 20 years in Australia.
I noticed this is a...
And obviously there are opportunities for other participants to join. So, Tyro, with its ADI licence, fills all of the criteria necessary to join the NPP, and there's a range of other banks that will too.
How would they do that? I mean, the original members have paid, I'm guessing, 7 figures to be part of this.
Sure.
So let's say a challenger bank comes along in 2-3 years' time. Has the price gone up? Has the price gone down? Can they buy in at the same level of membership? Sounds like a gym or something, doesn't it?
So the rules are quite clear. Participants need to contribute to capital in a way that they would have if they'd have joined from day one. No, excess rents being charged. It's quite clear how that's going to work.
And the process to join?
Does anyone...
wait for the second employee.
No, there's... no, I'm joking. There's somebody in the audience who's very familiar with the contract. There's a process that's set out in the Constitution and Shareholder Agreement around, filling in forms, making certain attestations and paying your money, and you get to, you get shares, you get to join, you get to connect directly, and you get to elect the people on the board.
Can I ask you about this diagram that I pinched from the Cuscal document I mentioned earlier? So this is talking about the in the centre is the NPP itself.
Yes.
And then you have 3 types of overlay service. The first overlay service, the first train that you mentioned.
Yep.
And this is a haven for TLAs, isn't it? 3-letter acronyms.
Correct.
The NPP, the ADI, the ICS.
There's pages of them.
It's been doing my head in all afternoon, I can tell you. The first one is interestingly named the Initial Convenience Service. There's one of those at Wynyard Station, isn't there? The ICS is the thing that actually lets us make payments in real time, yeah?
Yes and no. The ICS is a fancy name for the first overlay service. That's all it is. It's just the first. There had to be a first. Otherwise, you spend a lot of time building this infrastructure and you can't do anything with it. So the ICS is the first. It uses relatively little of the underlying infrastructure. It is effectively a rule book and a set of SLAs and a brand and a customer proposition that is run by BPay that has a long pedigree of running schemes. So it is, it's a very thin overlay. You join, you sign up to a product, it describes what the customer experience will be. It describes how quickly the money will flow. It describes the kind of messages, the marketing messages, and BPay will wrap kind of advertising around it to support growth. So it's a relatively thin overlay service. It's a type 1 overlay service.
But have I got it right
that a rule book?
It's the thing that allows us, so because it's the train, it's the thing that allows me to make an instant payment.
Yes.
So would another party be able to build an overlay that competed directly with the ICS?
Absolutely. I fully expect it.
So that my question was coming from,
if they perceive that there's it's like every rule, right? Is there a market gap? Can I do it better? Do I think I can get the volume? But my current example is coffee cards. 4 years ago there were 4 coffee cards, apps. Now there's maybe 2, or maybe there's just 1. So you start off, like every market, you start off with 1 and people see opportunities for growth, and then they proliferate, and then the market collapses back on itself. And I expect that the same thing will happen with overlay services.
What I was trying to think through was that if BPay is now processing almost all payments in Australia, its competitors will be saying, well, we want to have a go at that too. So I wasn't sure whether they would then come in as type 2 or type 3s, but you're saying they can come in as type 1 and directly compete.
Absolutely.
With the ICS.
Absolutely. Or they might decide they want to do something a bit more interesting that uses particular messages or uses a particular field that can support a particular use case and a gap that they see in the market. Then that would be a type 2 overlay service.
And then I was looking at some of the foreseeable real world benefits. I mean, it's hard to foresee them as you indicate. One thing that I was reading was that bank transfers could become a feasible payment option for buying goods and services, which is what you were talking about with driving your car, although I'm not so keen on having State Treasury taking money from my account for fines. But so in a sense, there's no need to pay a bill. That money can come straight out. Yeah,
so in the UK, which has had a faster payment service for about 8 years, the use case that's taken off, there's a range of them, is buying things on what we would call Gumtree. People do it all the time. Rather than going to the ATM and taking out cash, so you I'll send you money and you can see on your phone that the money's appeared, and I take the baby bassinet or the car or whatever. And so it's kind of a person-to-person payment system. Rather than me going to the bank and taking out cash or writing you a cheque, which you won't take because it'll bounce, I'll just send you the money and you can see the money and off you go. So, or people selling stuff at Fates and car boot sales. They don't want to get a merchant facility. They're not going to use it more than once. Sending money in real time enables you to the funds to be transferred and people to know that they've been paid.
I think there's great excitement.
They're very basic. I mean, they're very basic overlay services. Yeah. I mean, there's a whole range of different things that use the smarts in the technology that are a bit more interesting than that.
In the fintech community, I think there's great excitement around the NPP. I know you're the only employee and we're talking about the future.
Sure.
But what would the mechanics potentially be of a fintech? They've come up with an idea. Let's take the e-invoicing idea as an example.
Yep.
What are the mechanics of them engaging with the NPP, becoming part of it, putting their service out there?
Sure. So we will make available in time a range of information for people to download and read, some materials, some papers, some messaging standards, some YouTube videos for people to familiarise themselves with how this works. We're a relatively small organisation. We'll have no more than 15 staff in total, so it's quite a small organisation. So we'll want to make that process, the initial learning process, as efficient as possible. We might, for particular ideas, I mean, our role is not to pick winners. In that sense, it's not my job to say, well, I think your idea is good and your idea is not. That's for the market to decide. But we will, I imagine, provide a range of support in the form of information or point people to resources that we know exist to help them understand how the NPP can work and how they can use their product on top of that. For some fintechs, they might work together, in a space like this, or they might decide that their idea gets to a certain point where they want to go and pick a participant. That might be a very large participant that brings a large number of customers to the table. And there are obviously a number of banks that are investing in fintechs and taking an equity stake in return for giving them information and capital and access to a customer base. Or they might decide to self-fund it and work with a payments provider and to bring that that product to life and to pitch it into the market and see how it works. So I think there's a range of different pathways: independent, collaborative, or working with a bank or a group of banks. And we're starting to see some of those conversations happening already.
What about some questions from the audience? There's a few hands gone up. I might start with DK.
What's the charging model, especially on the low end?
So the service is will levy in time a wholesale rate per transaction, which is based on volume. So the more transactions the infrastructure does or a participant does, the cheaper the price will get. And that's a wholesale price that's paid by the organisation that's processing the transaction. Whether they pass that on to the end user is a matter for them.
Do you have any indicative pricing? I think SEPA boils down at 2 cents euro, and Fed Reserve does ACH at 2 cents US.
I mean, look, obviously...
Sorry, the question was, is there any indicative pricing?
No, there's no indicative pricing at the moment. I mean, obviously, that's the kind of ballpark that you might look to get to in order to provide value to money. That might be where you get to in the medium term, but obviously, it's far too early to tell. The more successful it is, the lower the price will be. As you can see, we've got a fixed outgoings. The more transactions that are processed, the lower that price will be.
Question over here from Jess.
So I found that really interesting, and I suppose my question probably steers more towards the degree of influence that you and the NPP will have over the overlay services that do want to connect in but obviously want to compete with the banks.
Sure.
And how do you create an even playing field? Because obviously a lot of the financial institutions that are part of creating the NPP are creating overlay-like services.
Sure.
So how does that sort of play out to ensure there's competition and,
Sure.
choice for consumers?
I mean, obviously, we'll see that evolve over time, and I don't know exactly how it's going to work, but the set of rules and regulations that govern the way that overlay services work will be made public and will be available for everybody to see, and assuming that you can meet minimum criteria around things like solvency and fit and proper, and that the business is viable, and that doesn't mean prudentially regulated, but viable and not going to cause risk, then we will approve an overlay service, and you don't have to have banks signed up to have an overlay service registered. If at the end of a 2-year period there are no banks that are using the overlay service, then we'll classify it as a kind of dormant overlay service, but ultimately you don't have to have banks on board or participants on board to bring an overlay service to life. You can register the overlay service first and find the customers later, or you can do it the other way around. You can partner with a bank, get one bank on board, and then try and sign up another one. My sense is, from my observation of the marketplace, that there's a diversity of view among banks. Some of the smaller banks are keen as mustard to partner with fintechs, and some of the larger banks are too. So my sense is that there's a diversity of opportunity across the marketplace, and my job as the administrator of the rule set is to provide access in an open way to as many overlay services as I can, and let the market decide.
What day will the first proper payment go through?
In the second half of 2017.
What day? Like a Tuesday?
In the second half of 2017.
What about international payments?
Great question. So at Cybos, there were at least 10 discussions occurring on the sidelines about how we get these various islands that have been built to talk to each other. The good news is that they're all moving to ISO and they're all using the ISO standard. There are obviously some issues around inter-country settlement risks that need to be sorted out, but they're not really difficult. My sense is that the demand is really high. The profit pools and the margins that are available from inter-country transactions are also really, really quite wide. I predict that, you know, my job is to get this thing working in Australia first, but there are very vigorous and very well advanced conversations about existing real-time payment systems, about how to connect them up across borders, and I think those conversations will continue.
Just a quick follow-up on the level playing field question. You're about, what, 3/4 from rolling the thing out. So what's the availability like for a fintech who wanted to develop something for things like APIs, interaction models, that kind of stuff? Because presumably the founding institutes already have some of this stuff.
You know, this is a, I know it's easy to say, this is a really complex piece of build, and my sense is that banks are working really hard to make sure that we can get to go live on day one. I think in parallel, some of those banks will be starting to stand up sandpits and APIs, and I know that some of them are, but you know, there's a lot of focus on ensuring that we go live on the date that I've told you in the second half of 2017. I think it'll come in time is the kind of short answer. I'm not trying to be cute. My hunch is that, my hunch is, I know from having worked in the program for 3 or 4 years that it's going to be a close run thing. And lots of people are focusing on standing up their own back offices, and in parallel, some of them are starting to make that infrastructure and that connectivity available, large and small.
It's a big job. You've got a big couple of years. You've got no end of public events coming up, I see from your diary. Are you having fun?
Yeah, absolutely. It's not often you get the chance to, you know, kind of nursemaid a large piece of infrastructure to life. I mean, I think this is a once in a lifetime opportunity. It's you know, what we're doing in Australia is really, really kind of interesting. I mentioned the UK faster payment system, which is kind of 10 years old or 8 years old, which in technology terms is kind of getting old now. They released a series of discussion papers about 6 months ago talking about if you were going to build a world-class payment system, what would it have? And they said, you know, it would have confirmation before payment. So, you know, do I want to pay you, get a name back, hit yes or no? Because that's how most misdirected payments happen, kind of fat finger errors. People enter the wrong number. So confirmation before payment. It would use the ISO 222 standard and be data rich. It would have request to pay functionality. It would be open and have open access. And it would have line-by-line settlement. And so, you know, you've got a country like the UK, which has been doing this for 10 years, saying, well, what are the features that we would add to our system to make it world-class? And the system that Australia's building will have all of those things in it from day one. So, you know, I think what the industry in Australia has done has been work collaboratively and effectively with the support of the Reserve Bank to build something that's world-class, and I think the model's a great model, and I'm looking forward to working with the banks and the market to bring it to life.
It's interesting you talk about building a piece of infrastructure. I think if you had to choose between building WestConnex, the NBN and the NPP, I'd choose the NPP. We're very grateful that you came to see us.
Have you been under Wynyard Tunnel? I love infrastructure. That Wynyard Walk is fantastic. Took them about 2.5 years, but you can kind of come in from George Street and exit at Barangaroo. highly recommend it.
And even better, no one's house got knocked down. So, so thank you for coming and seeing us and spending some time. We'd love to hear more about it over the months as this thing progresses, and no doubt there'll be some good mix between fintechs and the banks and what you guys are doing. And we look forward to being a part of that. Would you please thank Adrian for his time here tonight? Thank you very much for coming. Our next event is in November.